Our next inductee has a golden ear and spent his career asking the questions, what is good sound? Psychoacoustic scientist Dr. Floyd Toole identified the technical loudspeaker measurements that connect what listeners identified as good sound in double-blind listening tests. As a result, many companies changed how they design their speakers. His measurement methods have been codified into an industry standard. Born in New Brunswick, Canada, Dr. Toole built radios and loudspeakers growing up and developed a love of music. Just before he earned his PhD in 1965, the National Research Council of Canada recruited Toole to work as a research scientist. He found that prominent speakers did not measure well in the anechoic, that's a tough word, I mispronounced it, anechoic chamber, and he will correct me. But listeners in blind testing agreed on what sounded good. There were two parallel measurements, one technical and one subjective. Dr. Toole joined Harman International in 1991 to bring scientific methods to product development at Harman. Dr. Toole and his wife live in Southern California, where he continues to consult for Harman. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Toole.
That tonight's gonna be a good night. 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 That tonight's
There's snow on the roof, but what put the fire in the furnace is music. Anybody who gets involved with audio is there, partly at least, because they enjoy or participate in the creation of music. And that was true of me. And when I started this venture, this research venture in the early 1960s, mid-1960s, things were very different from the way they are now. Loudspeakers were all relatively inferior, let's just say. And it was a challenge to me to explain why, when I measured some of the well-respected products of the era, they didn't measure very well. The curves were all kind of lumpy and different from one another, and when we put them in a listening evaluation, they sounded very different from one another. Now, presumably, all of these different sounds were created to satisfy the requirement that we are all individual people and as such have individual tastes, and so there's one loudspeaker for each one of us, presumably, somewhere out there. That didn't make sense, though, because somewhere there are musicians who create a product, who create sound, recording engineers who capture that sound and process it and put it into a delivery medium, and then somewhere we will press a play button and we will hear that sound. The question is, what are we hearing compared to what the musicians and the recording engineers heard? And it seemed to me back then, it still seems to me, that our job in the audio industry is to do what we can to see that our consumers, wherever they hit that play button, hear something that resembles what the artists created. So, making a long story short, as was said, we have the measurements on one side, the technical data, and the subjective opinions on the other side. And when the subjective opinions are gathered in a situation where you can't see what you're listening to, we all seem to agree on what's good. That's a good thing. And what I and my colleagues had done since those early days is to codify the measurements in such a way that two eyes and a brain can look at a set of technical data and interpret them in a way that is meaningful to how two ears and a brain hears that music, that sound. That, I think, is worthwhile. So now the next challenge, and it says it's codified in a CEA standard, and the next challenge is to see that example of good sound gets distributed throughout, from recording studios to our homes and our cars and through the headphone versions. That's the rest of my life. Thank you.